DWUSA Media proudly presents part one of an exclusive interview with Roger Stone.
So we are pleased to have as a guest on the Conservative Parlor, Roger Stone. His name has been a household word for decades. He has worked as a political consultant for many notables, including Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Jack Kemp, Bob Dole, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. If you haven't heard of Roger, you must have been living in a cave without TV. On January 25th, 2019, Roger was arrested at his Fort Lauderdale, Florida home in what some have called Gestapo fashion. For the sake of our viewers who may have forgotten the story behind your previous encounter with federal law enforcement, would you summarize what occurred from your perspective and give us an update on the status of your current situation?
Certainly. I am almost a 40-year friend and advisor to one of the greatest presidents in our history, Donald J. Trump. Because of that, I was targeted by the Mueller investigation, pardon me, and ultimately they fabricated charges of lying to Congress. And then, surprisingly, for that first-time white-collar crime, despite the fact that I have no criminal record, quite obviously, at 5 a.m., 29 totally SWAT-clad FBI agents arrived at my home at 5 a.m. in 17 armored vehicles. There was a government helicopter overhead. 2 FBI amphibious units pulled up to the canal behind my house, because I live in Fort Lauderdale, the Venice of the United States, stormed my home. I was arrested at 6:16. My wife was perp walked out in the middle of the street in her nightgown and in bare feet at gunpoint, as was I, but I was wearing a Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt. They would not let me grant me access to my cell phone. They wouldn't let my wife have her cell phone. But then I noticed 25 feet from the front door was a full CNN camera crew. I now know by looking at my home security video cameras, in which I had a 360-degree view of the assault on my home, because the FBI surrounded my home, covering every exit. There was no reason to believe that I was a flight risk. They were well aware that I don't own a valid passport. Although I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, there were no guns in my home. I have, very young grandchildren, and I'm uncomfortable with them being around guns. The idea that I was going to flee is ridiculous. They made my my face famous by accusing me falsely of being a Russian traitor and a collaborator with WikiLeaks. And I live on a canal, but I can't swim very well. So I wasn't going anywhere. The fact that this was a setup was clear at my arraignment when the government didn't require any cash bond for my release, proving that they never believed I was a flight risk. Then the 29 agents proceeded to trash my home. They went through every square inch of it. If there was a framed picture hanging on the wall, they would take a knife and cut the back of the picture out to make sure I wasn't hiding anything inside. I have a pretty sizable library because I've been in politics. I see behind you, you've got the same kind of thing. I'm a reader. They went through every single book I owned, flipped through to make sure I wasn't hiding anything, and threw it on the floor. They turned every drawer in the house, even in the bedrooms, upside down and dumped them on the floor. There was no reason for this because they had been surveilling my email, my text messages, and my phone calls for well over 6 months, because they told the federal judge they had evidence of money laundering, mail fraud, money wire fraud, unauthorized access to a computer, receipt and distribution of classified information. There was never any evidence found of any of that, and no such evidence was ever produced by the government at my trial. I was then subjected to one of the most vile legal lynchings in American history. I faced a jury that had not a single Republican, not a single military veteran, not a single Roman Catholic, not a single African-American male, not a single registered independent. It was a hanging jury of Trump and Stone haters. We later learned that the jury forewoman had attacked me and President Trump repeatedly on Facebook and Twitter in 29, attacking me by name in the very case in which she had been selected as a juror, but she kept these postings on a private setting during jury selection and the trial, and then she quietly deleted them after I was unjustly convicted. Thank God that I turned to the Lord on the advice of many, many fine pastors, clergymen, my own parish priest, but particularly Reverend Franklin Graham, when I became so depressed about the fact that I was sure to be railroaded, that I had no chance of a fair trial, that the judge had gagged me from even defending myself in public. She prohibited my lawyers from challenging any of the underpinnings of this contrived indictment. The only Russians I met in 2016 was the FBI informant they sent to come see me. And I told them to pound sand. Oh, that's not in the Mueller report. So God in his mercy gave the president the wisdom and the courage and the political strength in an election year to grant me clemency and save my life. Final point, although Michael Avenatti and even Weinstein and Rick Gates and Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen were all sent to home confinement, I, at 69, with a history of asthma, was ordered to surrender to a COVID-19 infected prison in Georgia, far from my home, immediately, in violation of the law, all legal precedents, and the Department of Justice and Bureau of Prisons regulations. A death sentence. Wow. Donald Trump saved my life.
You were mentioning about family. Let's take a break from this and talk a little bit about it. As a grandfather of 14 and a great-grandfather of 8, I like to brag on mine anytime I get a chance. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, first of all, my wife is Cuban-American, Nydia Bertrand Stone. I don't know if you know many Cuban women, but they are tough as nails. And she has been my helpmate through, been my rock when I would become depressed, when I lose the will to fight, because they have unlimited resources. There were 600 lawyers working on my case. I had 3 lawyers, and at the end of the day, I don't believe they served me well. I prepared 800 exhibits of videos, emails, text messages to disprove the charges against me. My own lawyers would not use the evidence on my behalf. This thing was wired start to finish. I just thank God that the president had the wisdom to see through it, to see the flaws, and to act in a courageous act of both mercy and justice. Now, as for my family, my son is a law enforcement officer here in Florida. He saw the ad in the newspaper and he applied at age 35. He went through the academy, which is very difficult. And he now flies for them. He has a very large number of commercial hours. He's a very accomplished and precise pilot. I think he's probably detailed to the DEA because I say, son, what are you working on? And he says, sorry, Dad, I can't tell you. But I'm very proud of him. But he got the job on his own. He got every promotion on his own, despite the fact that I know the sheriff in the jurisdiction where he works. He's his own man. My daughter, he has, therefore, 2 daughters, my grandchildren. Then my daughter, who's grown, is a nurse in the county hospital system. She has 3 grown adult children, each of them, the last of whom has just graduated. They all choose to live in Ohio. My youngest granddaughter and her husband, Joe Yates, a great patriot, strong supporter of the president and of me, just had a son who is my first great grandson. So it is, and that is extraordinary. During my trial, just prior to the trial, the judge granted me permission to fly to Akron, where my granddaughter gave birth to my great grandson. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. The bad news is some liberals saw me inside the hospital, posted it online, and my daughter and her coming son actually received death threats through the hospital phone system.
Wow.
Liberals, I'm telling you, these liberals who say they're so tolerant, they are sick. They're sick.
Sounds like. As early as 1998, you were trying to convince Donald Trump to run for president. Why did you think he would be a good president? And do you feel he's likely to run again in 24?
Well, what attracted me, Trump, let's start from the beginning. I met Donald Trump when I was sent to New York State to organize Governor Ronald Reagan's campaign for president, late 1979. I wangled an invitation to meet Donald Trump, who I only knew through the town and through his splashy media. And I was immediately impressed on several levels. First of all, I asked him to join the Reagan Finance Committee, and he gave me a real serious cross-examination. Tell me why you think Reagan can win. Tell me why you don't think he's too old. Can you still carry California? What about Ohio? Do you think you have a shot in New Jersey? Add up to 270, he said for me. Go ahead, add up to 270. And I did. And I think he was impressed. And he said, look, I don't really like George Bush. John Connolly's been to come see me. I'm not impressed. Howard Baker, I had no idea he was so short. John Anderson, forget it. I'll tell you what, go out and see my dad, Fred, because he was a big Goldwater man, and he was a real conservative. But I think we'll both join your finance committee. And they did. So Donald Trump and his father, Fred, raised over $100,000 in 1979. That's a lot of money to help Ronald Reagan. But then he was like a man who'd made an investment. He would call every couple of days and say, how are we doing? What do the polls show? How's this going? How's that going? He had debate advice for Governor Reagan, which I passed on. So he was very much part of the team, and we became very good friends. In 1988, we were sitting in his office, and he was leafing through the New York Times, which is only the second worst newspaper in the country, the Washington Post being the worst. And he said, God, George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis. What a miserable choice. Surely there has to be some person better out there than these two. And I said, well, there is. There definitely is. And he said, well, then we should get behind him or her. I said, no, I'm talking about you. And he said, you're out of your mind. I said, no, look, you have the name ID, you have the stature, you have the record of running a multi-billion-dollar business. You are beloved among the American people as an example of the American success story. People, minority voters aspire to be like you, to live like you. You'd be a great candidate. And you're not connected to any of the mistakes of the past by Republicans or Democrats. You didn't give us these endless foreign wars where our national interests are apparent. You're not the one eroding our civil liberties. You know, you always talk about energy independence. Why don't you go make it happen? And he said, well, maybe someday. In 2000, I convinced him with a little help from Ross Perot and Jesse Ventura, who became a friend, then governor of Minnesota, to try to urge Donald Trump to seek the Reform Party nomination. He looked at it, I think, seriously, but he concluded that one could only win as a Republican or a Democrat. He had always been a Republican. His parents, Fred and Mary Trump, who I knew well, were vital, by the way, and active into their 90s, were always Republicans, although they donated to local Democrats. They lived in New York City, and they had zoning needs there and so on. But it was clear to me that he always liked the idea. In 1988, he flew to New Hampshire to speak to the Chamber of Commerce in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and he said three things. The trade deals this country is doing, we're getting ripped off. We send social workers to negotiate for us. They send their killers, the top graduates from their business schools. It's time to stop being the world's patsies. NATO, I understand why we did NATO. After the war, we were rich, they were broke. We propped them up, but now they're rich and we're broke. It's time for them to pay their fair share. This was 1988. We let our military get weak. We need to rebuild our military strength. Instead of running around and starting wars, we need to be so strong that no one challenges us. This is 1988. All the same things that he said when he was elected president. In 2012, he came very close to running. He endorsed Mitt Romney. He immediately had seller's remorse. After every single debate, my phone would ring and he would say, and I quote, "What's wrong with this dumb son of a bitch?" So in 2016, my dream was realized. And I really think it was a time when the times met an exceptional man. Because I can tell you, I've known Donald Trump for 40 years. He cannot be bullied. He cannot be bossed. He cannot be told what to do. He answers to only one entity, the American people. He doesn't need money. He's a billionaire. He doesn't need a flashy plane. He's got a great plane. He doesn't need a beautiful White House. He has one in Florida. He ran for president at huge personal sacrifice. This probably knocked his net worth down by a couple $2 billion. And now he's very polarized. You either love him or you hate him. He did it for us. Will he run again? If he wants to run again, it would be impossible to stop him from being nominated. It would be foolhardy, but it doesn't matter because I would be 100% for it. But he is in his middle 70s. 4 years is a very long time. The poor man has been in the meat grinder for 4 years, where everything he does gets criticized, rightly or wrongly. The attacks on his family are nauseating. If his sons did what Hunter Biden has done, based on the evidence, they'd have been hung. I mean, the two-tiered justice system is disgraceful. I'm an example of it. The prosecutor who took over my case announced the week of my conviction that Andrew McCabe would not be prosecuted for lying to the FBI. Why one standard for them and a different one for General Flynn and myself?
In part 2 of the Digital Warriors interview on DWUSAmedia.com with Roger Stone, Roger shares his ideas on how we can move forward. You don't want to miss that, coming April 18th on DWUSAmedia.com.
At this point, I want to lay out a forward-looking agenda for conservatives. How do we get out of this mess? I mean, what every day brings more bad news. The Johnson & Johnson vaccination has now been suspended because of questions about it.
Crisis? What crisis? That's the mainstream media. Roger Stone has a different opinion on what's going on at our southern border.
What's happening at our border is disgraceful. And to try to say that it's Trump's fault is a joke.
Roger Stone shares his unbridled opinion of the current makeup of the GOP in D.C. You do not want to miss that in part 2 of the Roger Stone interview.
We need a house cleaning in the Republican Party. We need to get rid of the weak-kneed, feckless, white wine swilling, green pants wearing, gutless establishment Republicans who like the status quo and don't want to fight.
Do not miss the second part of the Roger Stone interview performed by Digital Warriors. This interview can be found on DWUSAmedia.com.